If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Let's continue. The rain beat hard against the windows of the mansion in the Lincoln Park neighborhood of Chicago. It was one of those Illinois winter nights when the cold seemed to seep into your bones, and the wind off the lake whipped the tall oak trees in the yard with an almost personal fury. Inside the imposing three-story residence, chaos had a specific sound. 3 babies crying at the same time, a desperation that echoed through the marble, hallways like a cry for help that no one seemed to hear. The lights in the main living room were off, but the crystal chandelier in the foyer reflected the lightning that tore across the Chicago sky, creating dancing shadows on the walls covered in imported wallpaper. The mansion, at over 10,000 square feet, was usually a symbol of success and prosperity, but on this night, it felt more like a luxurious prison where dark secrets were beginning to sprout. On the second floor, the persistent crying came from the nursery, specially decorated for the triplets. The room had been designed by a famous interior designer from New York City, with custom furniture brought from Europe, wallpaper with delicate cloud and star designs, and a lighting system that simulated the sunset to help the babies sleep. But all that sophistication and comfort seemed useless in the face of the 3 children's despair. Ashley Davenport adjusted her imported silk dress and ran her hands through her impeccably styled blonde hair, trying to maintain her composure. At 32, she was the kind of woman who turned heads wherever she went, tall, elegant, with a practiced smile that opened doors in Chicago's most exclusive circles. She had grown up in an upper-middle-class family in Naperville, the daughter of a businessman in the coffee industry who went bankrupt when she was 20. Since then, Ashley had learned that beauty and charm were tools that could rebuild lost status, and she wielded them with the precision of a surgeon. But at that moment, alone in the nursery decorated with French furniture and imported wallpaper, the mask of perfection was beginning to crack. She wasn't prepared for this. She wasn't prepared for the smell of spit-up, for the dirty diapers, for the incessant crying that seemed to have no end. Ashley had imagined that being a stepmother to 3 babies would be something manageable from a distance, with competent nannies taking care of everything while she enjoyed the benefits of being Mrs. Miller. Reality was proving to be much different and much more irritating than she had anticipated. The triplets were only 5 months old and seemed to have coordinated their crying in unison. Ashley looked at the 3 white cribs lined up in a row and felt a wave of irritation rise in her chest. This wasn't what she had signed up for. When she accepted Robert Miller's marriage proposal, she envisioned a life of luxury, international travel, social events, and the enviable position of being the wife of one of the wealthiest businessmen in the Midwest. The children were an inconvenient detail she thought she could completely outsource, but Robert seemed to insist that she get more involved, that she form a bond, that she show maternal affection. Ashley found the whole idea absurd. She had never imagined herself as a mother, much less to motherless triplets who demanded constant attention, but she had to keep up appearances, at least until the wedding was official and her financial position was secure. After that, she would find a way to get these children out of the picture without Robert realizing her true intentions. She approached the middle crib, where Hector was crying, his face red and his fists clenched. With no one watching, or so she thought, she squeezed the baby's little arm harder than necessary, a cruel gesture disguised as impatience. The crying intensified. Ashley rolled her eyes and whispered bitter words about how these children were a burden, a mistake of fate that she would have to learn to endure until she got what really mattered. The Miller name, the fortune, the power. What she didn't know was that Robert was standing on the other side of the slightly ajar door, completely frozen. He had come up the stairs silently, worried about his children's persistent crying, wanting to check if everything was okay. What he witnessed in Ashley's last words and her rough gesture with Hector made his blood run cold. For a moment, he was speechless, as if his brain refused to process that the woman he planned to marry, the woman who had promised to love his children as her own, was capable of this. Robert was 43 and carried a heavy history on his shoulders, A widower for just a year, he still bore the pain of losing Catherine, his first wife, under circumstances he preferred never to discuss with anyone. They had been a passionate couple for 15 years, building together the tech empire that now grossed millions. Catherine was the only person who truly understood him, who saw beyond the facade of the successful businessman and knew his deepest insecurities. The triplets were born prematurely, in an emergency delivery that turned into a series of medical complications. Catherine did not survive the hemorrhages and subsequent infections. Robert spent the first few weeks after the tragedy in an almost catatonic state, dividing his time between the baby's incubators in the NICU and the funeral he could barely get through. For months he sank into a silent depression, caring for the babies with the help of specialized nurses, but feeling an emptiness that seemed impossible to fill. It was his therapist who suggested he needed to start living again, that he couldn't raise 3 children trapped in permanent grief. Robert tried. He went back to his business, resumed social commitments, and forced himself to attend events where he once shone alongside Catherine. It was at an art exhibition at the Art Institute of Chicago on a cold April night that he met Ashley. He thought he had finally found someone who could bring light back into that house. Ashley was charming, engaging, and seemed genuinely touched by his story. In the following weeks, she proved to be attentive and present, saying all the right things at the right times. Robert, desperate for a second chance at happiness and for a mother figure for his children, quickly clung to that hope. The marriage proposal happened in a sophisticated restaurant in River North, with a view of the illuminated city. Ashley cried tears that seemed genuine, promised to love the babies as if they were her own, and swore they would build a happy family together. Robert believed every word. He wanted to believe, he needed to believe. The alternative was to accept that he would spend the rest of his life alone, raising 3 children without a mother, carrying a guilt that was already consuming him from the inside. Now, hidden behind that door, Robert wondered how he had been. So blind. The clues had always been there. The way Ashley flinched when the babies cried, how she always found excuses not to participate in the nighttime routines, how her smile froze when someone commented on her future motherhood. But Robert had ignored it all, replacing reality with the fantasy he wanted to be true. Just then, he heard hurried footsteps on the stairs. A young, breathless voice called Ashley's name before even reaching the hallway. Robert discreetly stepped back, hiding in one of the side rooms, but remained attentive. Jessica Davis, 23, arrived soaked from the rain. She had been hired just 2 weeks ago to help on nights when the main nanny was off, but this particular night wasn't her shift. She was coming from an extra shift at the hospital where she worked as a nursing assistant, trying to save money to finish the nursing degree she had to put on hold due to financial hardship. Jessica's story was marked by constant struggle. The daughter of a housekeeper and a bus driver, retired on disability, she grew up in the Bridgeport neighborhood in a simple but loving home. She was always a brilliant student and managed to get a scholarship to study nursing at the University of Illinois, Chicago, a source of immense pride for her entire family. But in her sophomore year, her father suffered a stroke that left him with severe disabilities, and Jessica had to drop out of school to work full-time and help with medical expenses. They were difficult years, juggling shifts at the hospital, caring for her father, and the constant guilt of leaving her dream of graduation behind. But what weighed most heavily on her heart was a much older wound, a pain she had carried since childhood that had completely shaped her life choices. When she was just 12, Jessica had a little sister named Clara, a cheerful 3-year-old who was the light of their home. One December morning, Clara woke up with a very high fever and seizures. The family had no money for a taxi. The only car in the neighborhood had a broken engine, and the nearest clinic was closed. Jessica, still a child, tried to do everything she knew, helping her mother give Clara a lukewarm bath and apply cool compresses, but nothing seemed to work. By the time they finally made it to the public hospital, it was too late. Clara didn't make it. Jessica never forgave herself for not being able to do more, for not knowing what to do. That was why she chose nursing. That was why every child's cry hit her like a personal mission. She swore to herself that she would never again let a child suffer if it was within her power to help. That oath guided her through every shift, every decision, every moment of exhaustion she overcame by thinking of Clara. When she passed by the Lincoln Park mansion and heard the baby's desperate cries through the windows, she simply couldn't keep going. Something in that sound struck her right in the chest, in that still sore place she tried to keep locked away. These were 3 lives that needed help, 3 vulnerable children who depended on adults to survive. Jessica walked up the steps to the main entrance without thinking about the consequences, rang the doorbell urgently, and when the housekeeper answered, she simply said she had heard the crying and had come to help. Ashley looked at Jessica with a mixture of surprise and disdain. The young woman was in her wet hospital scrubs, her brown hair stuck to her face, her sneakers soaked. She looked completely out of place in that luxurious environment, and Ashley didn't miss the opportunity to make that clear with an ironic smile. Jessica, however, didn't wait for permission. She walked into the room and went straight to the cribs. Her medical training made her quickly assess each baby. Hector, the oldest by 3 minutes, was clearly the most distressed, and she noticed a slight redness on his little arm, as if someone had held him too tightly. Lucas, the middle one, was crying with irregular sobs that indicated he was already exhausted. Sophia, the youngest and only girl, had a tear-streaked face and eyes swollen from crying so much. Her heart ached not only for the children's condition, but for the familiar sense of urgency it awakened. It was as if time had rewound 15 years to when she looked desperately at Clara, not knowing how to help. But now it was different. Now she had knowledge, experience, and the trained hands of someone who had dealt with dozens of babies in the pediatric ward. Without a word, she picked up Hector first with an instinctive gentleness that came from the depths of her soul, not just from training. She rested his head against her shoulder, making that gentle rocking motion that every experienced caregiver knows. Then, carefully, she settled Lucas with one arm and Sophia with the other, improvising a sling with her own hospital apron, still damp from the rain. The 3 babies snuggled against her, forming a sort of human nest. Jessica began to sing softly, an old lullaby her mother used to sing to calm her and Clara on difficult nights in Bridgeport, when the power went out and the fear of the dark took over. The lyrics spoke of stars that guarded children's dreams, of a sky that protected those who slept with a pure heart. It was a simple song, but it was filled with memories, with maternal love passed down through generations in humble families who knew that affection cost nothing and was worth everything. Jessica's voice was soft, but it carried something deeper than technique or knowledge. It was pure maternal instinct, born from an old wound that had never fully healed. Each note of the song was a silent promise. I won't leave you alone, I won't fail you as I failed her. The 3 babies began to respond almost immediately. Lucas was the first to relax, his tense little body softening against Jessica's chest. Then it was Sophia, who let out a deep sigh and rested her head on Jessica's shoulder. Hector resisted a little longer, still frightened by the recent pain, but gradually he too surrendered to the warmth, the rhythm of her breathing, the security of that embrace. In less than 10 minutes, all 3 were sleeping soundly against Jessica's chest, completely safe and at peace. The silence that settled in the room was almost magical. After hours of non-stop crying, the sudden quiet seemed unreal. Ashley watched the scene leaning against the wall with an expression that mixed surprise, irritation, and something more calculating. She had tried everything she knew, or rather, everything she was willing to try, and nothing had worked. And now this simple girl, soaked from the rain in a worn-out hospital uniform, had achieved what seemed impossible. Robert, still hidden in the next room, felt his eyes sting. The scene he had just witnessed hit him with brutal force. The difference between what Ashley had done moments before and what Jessica was doing now was abysmal, painful, impossible to ignore. Ashley held the babies as if they were inconvenient objects, maintaining an emotional distance, counting the minutes until she could delegate the task. Jessica held them as if she were protecting precious treasures, with a total surrender that couldn't be faked. That was how Catherine had cared for the babies in the few days she had with them before she passed. That was how a real mother acted. And Robert, in that devastating moment of clarity, realized he had made a terrible mistake by bringing Ashley into that house, by placing his children in the hands of someone incapable of truly loving them. Ashley broke the silence with a controlled voice almost too sweet. She said that Jessica had a special gift with children, that the triplets clearly responded well to her. She proposed that Jessica take on more night shifts, with a considerable extra payment. Jessica, surprised and visibly moved by the opportunity to earn more, accepted without hesitation. She didn't notice the calculating glint in Ashley's eyes. She didn't realize she was being placed in a position that could be used against her later. In the following nights, Jessica began to care for the triplets with a dedication that went beyond professional. She always arrived a little before her shift and stayed a little longer than necessary. The babies showed immediate recognition when she entered the room. Hector would stretch out his little arms, Lucas would smile, and Sophia would calm down instantly. It was a pure, genuine connection that made Jessica feel she was finally fulfilling a mission she had failed in the past. Robert watched everything from a distance, growing more and more disturbed. He started paying attention to details that had previously gone unnoticed. The way Ashley avoided prolonged physical contact with the children, how she always delegated tasks to others, how her smile changed completely when she thought no one was looking. He desperately wanted to believe he was mistaken, that the moment he had witnessed on the first night had been just a moment of weakness, of exhaustion. But the more he watched, the harder it became to maintain that illusion. It was during one of those nights that Jessica began to notice strange things, small details that didn't make sense. The baby's feeding log showed times and amounts that didn't match what she found when she arrived. The bottles had a slightly chemical, sweetish smell that she couldn't identify. One night she found a small vial with a clear liquid in the nightstand drawer, unlabeled, with only a handwritten sticker that said, "Calming drops." Ashley had left a note instructing her to use them if the babies cried too much. Jessica, with her nursing training, was immediately on alert. 5-month-old babies should not be given medication without a doctor's prescription, especially unknown substances. She kept the vial and decided she needed to talk to Robert as soon as possible. But when she finally got a moment alone with him in the mansion's hallway, he was clearly uncomfortable. He listened to what she had to say with a tense expression, but when Jessica mentioned her suspicions about Ashley, he cut her off. He repeated justifications that sounded rehearsed. He said Ashley was inexperienced with children but was learning, that sometimes her instructions might seem strange, but they came from recommendations from private specialists, that Jessica was misinterpreting the situation. Jessica left that conversation with a heavy heart. Robert seemed to be defending Ashley more out of desperation than conviction. He wanted to believe he had made the right choice, that he wasn't making the same mistake twice, that his children would be safe. But deep down, Jessica sensed that he had doubts too. The following weeks grew progressively more tense. Objects started appearing broken or out of place, always when Jessica was alone with the children. An expensive vase shattered on the nursery floor, a milk stain on a white leather sofa, a crystal mobile fallen and broken. Ashley always appeared right after, with expressions of studied concern, asking what had happened. Jessica tried to explain that she hadn't done any of it, but the evidence was there, and the other staff members began to look at her with suspicion. The housekeeper herself, Mrs. Gable, a 60-year-old woman who had worked for the family for decades, started making subtle comments. She said Jessica seemed very distracted lately, that maybe she was working too much, that caring for 3 babies was a huge responsibility for someone so young. Jessica realized that Ashley was slowly orchestrating everything, building a narrative of incompetence, of negligence. Robert saw it all happening and felt trapped in a prison of his own making. Every time he witnessed Ashley manipulating a situation, every time he saw Jessica being unjustly accused, he felt the weight of his guilt increase. But he was paralyzed by fear. Fear of being wrong about Ashley. Fear of destroying another chance at happiness for his children. Fear of facing the fact that he had brought someone dangerous into his own home. On a rainy Thursday, something serious happened. Jessica had just arrived for her shift when she found Hector crying in a different way, weaker, more concerning. The baby was pale, sweating, clearly unwell. She picked up the bottle that was in the warmer and immediately knew something was wrong. The smell was strange, chemical, too strong. Her medical training set off all the alarms. Without a second thought, she discarded that bottle and prepared a new one with the original formula, feeding Hector quickly while monitoring his vital signs with the experience of someone who had worked in pediatric emergencies. The baby slowly began to improve, but Jessica was terrified. This had not been an accident. Someone had deliberately tampered with the bottle. She saved the discarded bottle in a thermal bag, planning to take it for analysis, but before she could do anything, Ashley appeared at the door with a private doctor. Dr. Evans was a middle-aged man with thin glasses and an expensive leather briefcase under his arm. Ashley explained, in a concerned and perfectly calibrated voice, that she had noticed Jessica acting strangely in recent weeks. She mentioned the broken objects, the incidents, and now the fact that Hector was sick precisely on her shift. The doctor examined the baby, who was already better, and then turned his attention to Jessica. The questions started subtly but became progressively more invasive. The doctor asked if Jessica was sleeping well, if she wasn't feeling overwhelmed, if she didn't harbor any resentment for working in an environment so different from her own. He insinuated, in a veiled but clear way, that perhaps she was emotionally unstable, that maybe there was some unresolved psychological issue that could be affecting her judgment. Ashley stood by with a look of false concern, reinforcing each insinuation with small nods. Jessica felt the ground give way beneath her. Here she was, being accused of negligence, of instability, perhaps even something worse when all she had done was try to protect these children. She tried to explain about the tampered bottle, but her words were taken as more evidence of mental confusion. Ashley suggested with a cruel gentleness that perhaps it would be best for Jessica to take a few days off as a precaution. The doctor immediately agreed. Robert was called and listened to Ashley's account. He looked at Jessica, at the doctor, at Ashley, and then at his children. Jessica could see the internal struggle in his eyes, but in the end, he didn't have the courage to face the truth. He agreed that she should take a temporary leave. Jessica left the mansion that night with her clothes damp again, this time not from the rain, but from the tears she couldn't control. For the next few days, Jessica stayed locked in the small apartment she shared with 2 roommates in the Logan Square neighborhood. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. The injustice hurt more than anything she had ever experienced, but more than her personal pain, what truly tormented her was the worry for the triplets. They were in danger. She was absolutely sure of it. And no one was listening. It was on one of those sleepless nights that Jessica made a decision. She couldn't just abandon those children. If no one was going to protect them, she would do it herself, even if it cost her everything. She waited until it was very late, after midnight, and returned to the Lincoln Park mansion. She knew the security guards' schedules, knew where the cameras didn't reach. She managed to get in through the back, through the laundry room door that the housekeeper always forgot to lock. The house was silent. Jessica went up the service stairs with her heart pounding, but she was determined. She reached the nursery and was relieved to see the 3 babies sleeping peacefully, but something caught her attention. One of the teddy bears in the cribs was positioned strangely, pointing directly at the babies. Driven by an instinct, Jessica picked up the bear and examined it carefully. That's when she found it. A micro camera hidden inside the seam, so small it would be impossible to notice without looking for it. Jessica's blood ran cold. Someone was secretly filming the babies. But why? She looked around the room and found 2 more hidden cameras, one inside a lampshade and another behind a picture frame. All of them were pointed at the cribs, capturing every possible angle. Jessica needed to understand what was happening. She left the room silently and began to explore the mansion. It was in one of the forgotten rooms on the 3rd floor, an old library that no one used anymore, that Jessica found the answer. On an old desk, half hidden behind dusty books, was a folder of documents. Jessica opened it with trembling hands and began to read. What she saw made her gasp. They were contracts, forms, and correspondence with a children's psychiatric clinic located in upstate New York. The proposal was to admit the triplets under the pretext of preventive treatment for possible developmental trauma. The initial term was 6 months, with the possibility of indefinite extension. The letters exchanged with the clinic made it clear that everything had been personally arranged by Ashley. She had convinced the institution's director that the children needed a controlled environment, away from external influences, to develop properly. There were mentions of generous payments, guarantees of secrecy, but the most disturbing part was a handwritten letter from Ashley to someone identified only as R, where she openly explained her plan: to get rid of the children, to keep them away from Robert Long. Enough to consolidate her position, to gain full control over his fortune and business. Jessica took photos of every document with her phone, her hands shaking so much she had to rest the device on the desk to get clear images. She needed to get out of there as soon as possible and take this evidence to someone, to the police, to a lawyer, to anyone who could help. She put her phone away and started to leave the library, but when she opened the door, she almost ran into someone. It was a man in a grey suit holding a briefcase. He looked at her with surprise and then with growing suspicion. Before Jessica could react, she heard Ashley's voice coming from the hallway. "What are you doing here?" The voice was low, dangerous. Ashley appeared next to the man in the suit, and her eyes flashed when she realized where Jessica was. The situation was about to explode. Jessica needed to get out, but the man was blocking the way. In a swift move, she feigned one direction and then darted to the opposite side, running down the service stairs at a dangerous speed. She heard footsteps behind, her shouts, but she didn't stop. She managed to get out of the mansion through the back and ran through the streets of Lincoln Park until she couldn't anymore, her lungs burning, her legs trembling. When she finally stopped, she was several blocks away, leaning against a lamppost trying to catch her breath. She looked at the phone in her hand and saw that the photos were there, intact. She had the proof. Now she just needed to figure out what to do with it. What Jessica didn't know was that the situation was about to get much, much worse. Before there was any chance of it getting better, Ashley broke the silence with a controlled voice, almost too sweet, laden with a falseness that only those who knew her well could perceive. She said that Jessica had a special gift with children, that the triplets clearly responded well to her, as if it were something magical and inexplicable. The proposal came next, wrapped in compliments and promises. Ashley suggested that Jessica take on more night shifts, especially on days when the routine was heavier. The pay would be generous, far above what she earned at the hospital. There would even be a room available in the staff quarters of the mansion for when her shifts were back-to-back. Jessica, surprised and visibly moved by the opportunity to earn more, accepted without hesitation. That extra money meant she could help more with her father's medical expenses, maybe even resume her studies in a few months. It meant hope, a chance to rebuild the dream she had left behind. What she didn't notice, because her natural kindness didn't allow her to see the malice in others, was the calculating glint in Ashley's eyes. She didn't realize she was being placed in a position that could be used against her later, that she was becoming a pawn in a game much darker than she imagined. Robert, still hidden in the adjacent room, watched everything with a heavy heart. He saw clearly what Ashley was doing. She was creating a situation where Jessica would become increasingly close to the babies, increasingly indispensable, so she could then use her as a scapegoat when the time was right. It was a carefully constructed trap, and Jessica was walking right into it with the innocence of someone who only wants to help. He should have intervened right. Then and there should have exposed Ashley, should have protected this young woman who had just saved his children from despair. But fear paralyzed him. Fear of misinterpreting, fear of once again destroying the possibility of a complete family, fear of facing that he was repeating mistakes he had sworn never to make. So he remained silent, a coward, letting events take their dangerous course. In the following nights, Jessica became a more intense part of the mansion's routine. She always arrived punctually at 8 in the evening, after her shifts at the hospital, bringing with her that gentle yet determined energy that instantly comforted the babies. She had a habit of stopping at the nursery door for a few seconds before entering, just observing, checking if everything was okay. It was an unconscious ritual, born from years of working in pediatric emergencies where assessing the situation before acting could mean the difference between life and loss. The triplets showed immediate recognition when she entered the nursery. Hector would stretch out his little arms as soon as he heard her footsteps in the hallway, with that urgent baby motion that knows comfort is coming. Lucas would smile that toothless grin that only babies can manage, a pure, unfiltered smile that lit up his chubby little face. Sophia would calm down even before being picked up, just by sensing her presence, as if she recognized her by scent, by the sound of her breathing, by the timbre of her voice. Jessica developed specific routines for each of them, respecting the personalities that were already beginning to emerge even at such a young age. Hector liked to be rocked with firmer, more secure movements that made him feel protected. Lucas preferred tummy rubs and songs sung very softly near his ear. Sophia needed skin-to-skin contact, calming down most when she felt the warmth of a tight hug, as if wanting to return to the womb where she had been safe for a few months. Each bottle was prepared with meticulous care. Jessica tested the temperature on her wrist, checked the consistency, and smelled it to make sure everything was right. These were automatic gestures, the product of years of training, but also filled with love. While feeding each baby, she would talk softly, telling them about her day at the hospital, about the children she had helped, about her dreams of one day graduating and opening a community clinic in Bridgeport so that other families wouldn't go through what hers had. The babies didn't understand the words, of course, but they responded to the tone of her voice, the rhythm of her speech, the emotion behind each syllable. It was as if, even without linguistic comprehension, they captured the essence of what she was saying. Hector would fix his little eyes on her face when he heard more animated stories. Lucas would give those little broken giggles when she changed her tone to make funny voices. Sophia would simply relax completely, surrendering to the sound of that voice that meant safety. It was a pure, genuine connection that touched something deep in Jessica's heart. Every night she spent caring for those 3 children, she felt as if she were fulfilling a sacred mission, as if she were finally making peace with the past. She would talk softly to the babies while changing diapers, tell made-up stories while preparing bottles, and sing old songs while rocking them to sleep. These were moments of absolute peace, where all the harshness of the outside world disappeared, and only that pure bond between caregiver and children existed. But gradually, subtly, Jessica began to notice unsettling details that didn't make sense. The feeding log kept on a clipboard next to the cribs showed times and amounts that didn't match what she found when she arrived for her shift. One day, the log said Hector had taken 5 ounces of formula at 6 in the evening, but when Jessica arrived at 8, the baby was clearly starving, crying with that specific hunger cry that any experienced caregiver recognizes. The bottles left prepared in the warmer had a slightly chemical sweetish smell that didn't correspond to the normal formula. She knew. Jessica, with her nursing training and years of experience in the pediatric ward, knew how to recognize when something was off. That smell made her uncomfortable, setting off alarms in her mind trained to detect anomalies. One night, while organizing the cabinet with the baby's supplies, she found something that made her stop completely. In the nightstand drawer, hidden behind packages of diapers, was a small vial with a clear liquid. It had no official label, just a handwritten sticker in elegant cursive that said calming drops. Next to the vial was a note from Ashley with detailed instructions. Apply 3 drops to the evening bottle if the babies show excessive agitation or prolonged crying. Jessica's blood ran cold. 5-month-old babies should not be given medication without a strict doctor's prescription, especially unknown substances without proper identification. This violated every safety protocol she had learned, every basic precaution that any responsible person should take with such young children. She carefully picked up the vial, using a clean diaper to avoid leaving her fingerprints, and put it in her bag. She had to show this to someone. She had to warn Robert about the danger his children were in. The opportunity arose on a Saturday morning, when Robert was in the yard supervising some repairs to the security fences. It was one of those Chicago winter days where the sun appeared timidly between gray clouds, and the biting cold reminded you that January wasn't over yet. Jessica had spent the previous night sleepless, planning exactly what she would say, how she would present the evidence, how she would make Robert see the danger he was ignoring. She went down the service stairs with her heart beating so hard it seemed to echo in the silent hallways. She held the suspicious vial wrapped in a clean diaper, her hands trembling slightly from a combination of nervousness and lack of sleep. When she reached the yard, she saw Robert talking to the gardener about pruning the oak trees. He was wearing a grey wool sweater and jeans, looking tired and older than his 43 years. The last few months had taken a visible toll. Jessica waited for the gardener to walk away before approaching. When she called his name, Robert turned with an expression that mixed surprise and discomfort, as if he already knew this conversation would be difficult. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She showed him the vial, explained where she had found it, and told him about Ashley's handwritten instructions. Her voice started out controlled, but became progressively more urgent as she detailed all the evidence she had collected. She explained about the feeding logs that didn't match, the chemical smell in the bottles, the times that made no sense. She mentioned her experience in the hospital's pediatric unit, the years working with premature babies and vulnerable children, the training that had taught her to recognize signs of trouble. She wasn't making it up, she wasn't exaggerating. She was just presenting verifiable facts that any competent professional would recognize as warning signs. Robert listened to her with an increasingly tense expression. The muscles in his jaw clenched and unclenched in a rhythm that betrayed his internal conflict. His hands balled into involuntary fists, then opened, then closed again. His eyes, which normally had a soft brown hue, seemed darker in the morning light, heavy with conflicting emotions. For a moment, Jessica had real hope that she would finally be heard, that he would take the necessary steps to protect his children. But then he looked toward the mansion, specifically at the second-floor windows where the French lace curtains moved slightly, with the wind coming through the cracks. He knew Ashley was there, probably watching, probably waiting to see how he would react. And something in him shut down. Jessica saw it happen in real time, as if a steel door had descended between them. Fear won over reason. Denial imposed itself over reality. When he spoke again, his voice sounded distant, mechanical, as if he were repeating a script he had rehearsed 1,000 times in the mirror to convince himself of his own lie. He said that Ashley was inexperienced with children, that she was on a natural learning curve, that it was unfair to judge her so harshly. He mentioned the private pediatricians he himself had hired, doctors with impeccable resumes who gave specific guidance. He suggested that perhaps these instructions seemed strange to someone without the same specialized training, but that they made sense within a broader context. And then came the part that hurt the most. Robert suggested, with a cruel gentleness, that Jessica was under a lot of stress. She worked 2 exhausting jobs, cared for her sick father, and carried old, unresolved traumas. Maybe, just maybe, her judgment was being affected by all of this. Maybe she was seeing problems where none existed, interpreting normal situations through a filter distorted by exhaustion and emotional baggage. He thanked her for her concern, called her dedicated and attentive, but assured her that everything was under control, that he as a father was monitoring everything closely, that there was no real cause for alarm. Jessica left that conversation with a painful tightness in her chest that went beyond frustration. She understood what was happening. Robert wasn't defending Ashley because he believed her. He was defending her because he needed to believe, because accepting the truth would mean admitting that he had failed his children again, that he had brought danger into his home. It was easier to discredit Jessica, to consider her over the top, than to face the terrifying reality that was unfolding. That night, Jessica returned to the small apartment she shared with 2 roommates in Logan Square and lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, trying to decide what to do. She knew she couldn't just abandon those children, but she also had no legal authority to do anything. She wasn't a relative, not the official nanny. She was just a temporary helper who could be dismissed at any moment. If she made too much noise, if she tried to involve the authorities without concrete proof, she would probably just get herself removed, leaving the triplets even more vulnerable. She decided she needed to be more careful, more strategic. She began to document everything discreetly. She photographed the feeding logs, noted the inconsistencies, and saved samples of the suspicious formulas in sterilized vials she brought from the hospital. She kept a detailed journal of everything she observed, with dates, times, and precise descriptions. If the time came when she needed to prove something, she would have evidence. The following weeks were progressively more tense and disturbing. Objects started appearing broken or out of place, always when Jessica was alone with the children or had just left the room. The first incident happened on a rainy Tuesday. A Ming Dynasty porcelain vase worth more than Jessica would earn in 6 months of work appeared shattered on the nursery floor. Jessica was absolutely certain that the vase was intact and in its place on the dresser when she had left for no more than 3 minutes to get filtered water from the kitchen. But when she returned, there it was, in hundreds of pieces scattered across the Persian rug. Ashley appeared at the door less than a minute later, with a speed that only made sense if she had been waiting for it to happen. She was wearing a white silk robe and had a look of studied concern on her face, but Jessica noticed something strange in her eyes, a glint that didn't match the feigned worry. It was satisfaction. Ashley was satisfied. The questions came loaded with insinuation. How did this happen? Were you in the room when it fell? Are the children okay? You didn't hurt yourself trying to grab something and accidentally knock over the vase? Each question was phrased to suggest guilt without directly accusing, planting doubts that would grow over time. 2 days later, mysterious stains appeared on the white Italian leather sofa in the living room, right after Jessica had passed by, carrying Sophia to show the little girl the city lights through the panoramic window. The housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, was the one who discovered the stains. She called Jessica over with a sharp tone, pointing at the sofa, as if witnessing a crime. The stains looked like spilled coffee, but Jessica hadn't had coffee that day, hadn't even entered the room with anything in her hands besides the baby. Mrs. Gable looked at the stains and then at Jessica, with poorly disguised disapproval. The woman was 63 and had worked for the Miller family since before Robert's first marriage. She was loyal, traditional, and believed everything Ashley said. She muttered something about young people not knowing the value of things, about how hard it was to find responsible employees these days. Jessica tried to explain that she hadn't done it, but her words sounded weak, too defensive. The next incident was more disturbing. An expensive Swarovski crystal mobile, which hung over the cribs from a polished bronze frame, fell and shattered one night when Jessica was alone in the room with the babies. She hadn't even touched the mobile. In fact, she was on the other side of the room, changing Lucas's diaper. She heard the sound of metal breaking, the tinkle of crystals shattering against the floor, and when she turned, she saw the shards scattered dangerously close to Hector's crib. Her first thought was pure panic. What if the shards had hit the baby? What if he had been cut? She rushed to check on Hector, examining every inch of his skin, checking the entire crib for fragments of glass. Luckily, none of the babies were hurt. But when Ashley appeared minutes later, accompanied by Mrs. Gable and the family's driver, the scene looked incriminating. Jessica was standing next to the crib, with broken crystals around her feet, seemingly at the exact spot where the accident had happened. The atmosphere in the mansion became progressively hostile. The other staff members began to look at Jessica with growing suspicion. Conversations would stop when she entered the kitchen. The housekeeper made subtle comments about young women who didn't know how to handle the responsibility of working in a family home. The gardener mentioned seeing Jessica near the library at a time when she should have been in the children's room, a statement that was completely false but planted another seed of doubt. Jessica clearly saw what was happening. Ashley was orchestrating a systematic campaign to destroy her credibility, creating a history of failures, negligence, and suspicious behavior. Each incident was carefully calculated to look like an accident caused by Jessica's carelessness. Every piece of evidence pointed in her direction, and every witness was subtly manipulated to confirm the narrative Ashley wanted to establish. But Jessica had no way to prove it. There were no security cameras in the nursery, only in the hallways and common areas. The evidence was always circumstantial, never definitive, and Ashley was too skilled to leave obvious traces. Every move she made was calculated, every word chosen with care, every expression perfectly calibrated to convey genuine maternal concern. The situation reached a critical point on a Thursday night when something much more serious happened. Jessica had just arrived for her shift and found Hector in a clearly worrying state. The baby was pale, with cold sweat on his forehead, irregular breathing, and glazed eyes. She picked him up immediately and noticed he was slightly feverish. Her medical instincts set off all the alarms. The bottle that was in the warmer, prepared for Hector, had that chemical smell she had noticed before, but this time it was much stronger, almost unbearable. Jessica had no doubt. She immediately discarded that bottle and prepared a new one with the original formula she had brought hidden in her bag, stored in a thermal container. She fed Hector carefully, monitoring every reaction, every vital sign, using all the knowledge she had acquired from years of working in pediatrics. Slowly, very slowly, the baby began to improve. The color returned to his face, his breathing regularized, and his eyes regained their sparkle. Jessica held him for hours, refusing to put him in the crib, watching his every move, ready to act if there were any complications. Only when she was absolutely sure that Hector was stable did she allow herself to breathe a sigh of relief. She stored the contaminated bottle in a sterilized vial, labeled it with the date and time, and hid it in her bag. This was the proof she needed. With this sample, she could have a lab analysis done and find out exactly what was being put in the baby's food. But before she could leave the mansion with the evidence, the situation exploded. Ashley appeared in the room accompanied by Dr. Evans, the private doctor who had previously attended to the family. She explained, in that perfectly modulated, concerned voice, that she had noticed strange behavior from Jessica in recent weeks. She mentioned the broken objects, the incidents, the comments from other staff members, and now the fact that Hector had fallen ill precisely during her shift. The insinuation was clear. There was something wrong with Jessica, something that was putting the children in danger. Dr. Evans was a distinguished-looking man in his 50s, with gold-rimmed glasses and a posture that conveyed authority. He examined Hector with professional care, asking technical questions that Jessica answered with precision. The baby was fine now, stable, with no signs of serious problems, but then the doctor turned his attention to Jessica, and the tone of the conversation changed completely. The question started subtly, disguised as medical concern. He asked about her sleep routine, if she was resting properly, if she wasn't feeling overwhelmed. He questioned her mental health, if there was a history of depression or anxiety in her family, if she wasn't taking any psychiatric medication. He suggested that working 2 jobs simultaneously, especially dealing with emotionally charged situations like caring for motherless orphans, could be affecting her emotional balance. And then came the cruelest insinuation, wrapped in medical language and pseudo-concern. Dr. Evans mentioned cases he had followed throughout his career, situations where caregivers developed unconscious resentments from working in environments very different from their own realities. He spoke of subliminal envy, of how people in vulnerable positions sometimes reacted in self-destructive ways when exposed to luxuries they could never have. He didn't directly say that Jessica was guilty of anything, but he left the idea hanging in the air, poisonous and devastating. Ashley stood by throughout the conversation with expressions of false concern that anyone trained in manipulation would recognize. She reinforced each of the doctor's insinuations with small nods, calculated sighs, and delicate touches on his arm as if she were genuinely distressed by the situation. It was a perfectly orchestrated performance, and Jessica was being destroyed before her very eyes. She tried to explain about the tampered bottle, about all the evidence she had collected, about the systematic pattern of sabotage, but her words were received as confirmation of their suspicions. The doctor exchanged a significant look with Ashley, one of those looks that says, "See, she really is paranoid." He suggested that perhaps Jessica was developing persecutory delusions, seeing conspiracies where none existed. Robert was called and arrived at the nursery with a tired and worried expression. He listened to Ashley's account, Dr. Evans' observations, and then looked at Jessica. In that moment she could see the internal struggle happening behind his eyes. She saw that a part of him knew there was something deeply wrong with the whole situation, that the pieces didn't fit, that Ashley was lying. But she also saw fear winning, denial taking over, cowardice prevailing. The decision was made right then and there. As a precaution, they said, Jessica would be temporarily relieved of her duties. She would be paid for the week she had worked, but she was not to return until the situation was clarified. Dr. Evans suggested she see a psychologist, take a few days off and reflect on her feelings. Ashley agreed with everything, adding that she was truly concerned for Jessica's well-being and hoped she would find help. Jessica left the mansion that night feeling as if she had been hit by a truck. The humiliation burned more than any physical pain. To be accused of mental instability, of resentment, of being a threat to children she loved as if they were her own, was a cruelty that cut deep. But more than her personal pain, what truly tormented her was the absolute certainty that the triplets were in mortal danger, and she had been removed just when they needed protection the most. She returned to her apartment in Logan Square and spent the entire night awake, staring at the cracked ceiling of the small room she shared with Megan, a radiology technician, and Patricia, a public school teacher. The two were asleep in the bunk beds on the other side of the room, their breathing deep and regular, oblivious to the mental storm Jessica was facing. The window was slightly open, letting in the distant sound of traffic on the main avenue and the smell of rain that threatened but had not yet fallen. Her mind spun endlessly, revisiting every detail, every piece of evidence, every sign of danger she had detected. She thought of the triplets' little faces, of the absolute vulnerability of those 3 babies who depended entirely on adults to survive. She thought of Clara, the little sister she had lost, of the horrible feeling of helplessness she had carried since that terrible December night. She thought of the oath she had made to herself to never again let a child suffer if it was within her power to help. She couldn't just accept this. She couldn't abandon Hector, Lucas, and Sophia. If she did, if she let fear and the feeling of helplessness win, she would never be able to forgive herself. She would carry this guilt for the rest of her life. It would be like losing Clara all over again, but this time by her own choice, out of cowardice, for giving up when things got tough. Around 4 in the morning, she made a decision that would change everything. If no one would believe her words, she would have to find irrefutable proof that couldn't be denied or reinterpreted. If she had no official authority, if she was being painted as unstable and dangerous, if every move she made was twisted to look suspicious, then she would have to change her strategy completely. The idea that formed in her mind was risky, possibly illegal, certainly dangerous. She would have to go back to that mansion without permission after being formally dismissed. She would have to sneak in, investigate on her own, and find concrete evidence of what Ashley was planning. If she were discovered, she could be arrested for trespassing. If things went very wrong, she could lose not only that job but also her position at the hospital, maybe even her license to work in healthcare. But weighing the risks against the alternative of doing nothing, of leaving 3 defenseless babies in the hands of someone who clearly wanted to harm them, the choice was obvious. Jessica Davis, who had grown up in Bridgeport learning that some things were worth fighting for regardless of the cost, who had lost a sister because she couldn't do anything, was not going to lose 3 more children without fighting to the end, even if it meant risking everything she had worked so hard to build. Jessica waited 3 days before putting her plan into action. 3 days of watching the mansion from a distance, memorizing the security guards' schedules, studying the blind spots of the security cameras she had noticed during her weeks working there. 3 days of mentally rehearsing every step, every move, preparing for what she had to do. During the day, she maintained her routine at the hospital. But at night, instead of sleeping, she sat by her apartment window planning every detail. Megan and Patricia had noticed something was wrong. They asked if she was okay if something had happened at the mansion where she worked. Jessica lied, saying she was just tired, that the double shifts were taking their toll. They accepted the explanation because they were good people who respected each other's privacy. But Jessica saw the concern in their eyes every time they caught her awake in the middle of the night, staring out the window as if searching for something in the dark Chicago sky. On the 4th night after being dismissed, a damp and moonless Thursday, Jessica left the apartment wearing dark clothes and carrying only the essentials: a fully charged phone, a small flashlight, and a desperate courage that came from a very deep place in her soul. She took 2 buses to get to Lincoln Park, then walked through the tree-lined streets until she saw the mansion. The property looked even more imposing at night, with its exterior lights illuminating the stone facades and perfectly manicured gardens. Jessica circled the high wall until she reached the back, where the service area was. The laundry room door had an old lock that Mrs. Gable always complained didn't work properly. Jessica had seen. The housekeeper simply pushed the door open several times when the key got stuck. She prayed that security flaw still existed. She pushed the door slowly, applying steady pressure at the exact point she had observed. She felt resistance, then a soft click, and the door swung open. Her heart was beating so hard it seemed to echo in the silent night. She slipped inside quickly, closed the door behind her, and stood for long seconds in the darkness of the laundry room, waiting for her eyes to adjust to the gloom and listening intently for any sign that she had been detected. The house was silent. Through the thick walls, she could hear the distant ticking of the grandfather clock in the main hallway. She knew that sound. She had heard it so many times during her nights working there that it had become a kind of background soundtrack. Now, in the darkness and silence, the sound seemed amplified, each second marked like a countdown to the moment she would be discovered. She moved slowly, using her phone's flashlight only when absolutely necessary, always covering the light with her hand to reduce the glare. She went up the service, stairs she knew so well, each step creaking softly under her weight, each sound making her heart jump. She reached the 2nd floor and went straight to the nursery. The door was ajar, and Jessica could hear the soft breathing of the 3 sleeping babies. She entered silently and stood by the cribs for a moment, just looking at them. Hector was sleeping on his back, his little arms stretched above his head in complete abandon. Lucas was on his side, one tiny hand near his face. Sophia, the youngest, was curled up in her pink blanket, looking like a cozy little caterpillar. They were so vulnerable, so completely dependent on the adults around them. The sight reinforced Jessica's determination. She was doing the right thing, no matter the risk. She began to examine the room systematically. That's when she noticed something strange. One of the teddy bears in Hector's crib was positioned oddly, pointing directly at the babies at an angle that didn't seem natural for a toy simply left there. Driven by an instinct she couldn't explain, Jessica picked up the bear and examined it carefully under the faint light of her phone. Her blood ran cold when she found what she was looking for. Inside the seam, skillfully hidden but noticeable to someone who knew to look, was a micro-camera. It was tiny, the size of a small coin, but clearly functional. The lens was positioned to capture the cribs perfectly. Someone was secretly filming the babies, recording every moment, every action of anyone in the room. Jessica felt a wave of nausea mixed with anger. This explained a lot. Ashley wasn't just sabotaging objects and creating compromising situations. She was documenting everything, creating edited evidence that could be used for any purpose. With trembling hands, she began to search for more cameras. She found 2 more, one hidden inside a decorative cloud-shaped lamp, another behind a picture of forest animals on the wall. All were strategically pointed to capture different angles of the room. It was a complete, professional surveillance system, designed to leave no blind spots. Whoever had installed it knew exactly what they were doing. Jessica photographed each camera with her phone, documenting their locations, angles, everything. But she knew this still wasn't enough. Hidden cameras could be explained away as a security measure, as the excessive but understandable concern of a widowed father. She needed to find more. She needed to uncover the real plan behind all this manipulation. She left the nursery and began to explore the mansion. She avoided the main areas where she knew there would be official security cameras. She focused on the forgotten rooms, the spaces no one used anymore. That's how she ended up in the old library on the 3rd floor. The door was locked, but the lock was old, the kind that could be opened with a bobby pin and some patience. Jessica didn't have a bobby pin, but she had a paperclip she carried in her bag. It took nearly 10 minutes of frustrated attempts, her fingers aching, sweat trickling down her back despite the cold, but finally she heard the telltale click and the door opened. The library was dusty, clearly abandoned for months. Dark wood shelves ran from floor to ceiling, filled with books that probably no one had touched since Catherine had passed away. In the center of the room was an old rosewood desk, and that's where Jessica directed her attention. The drawers were unlocked. The first contained only old office supplies, dried-up pens, time-yellowed letterhead. The second had family. Photo albums that Jessica quickly flipped through, seeing pictures of Robert and Catherine in happy moments. Trips, celebrations, her growing belly during the pregnancy. It was painful to see that happiness frozen in time, knowing it had all ended so tragically. But it was in the third drawer, hidden under a pile of old magazines, that she found what she was looking for. A brown document folder with the golden crest of an institution in the top corner. Jessica opened it with trembling hands and began to read. What she saw made her gasp. They were detailed contracts, filled-out forms, and official correspondence with a children's psychiatric clinic called the Renaissance Institute, located in a small town in upstate New York. The documents proposed the institutionalization of the triplets under the pretext of preventive treatment for possible developmental trauma caused by the premature loss of their mother. The initial term was 6 months, with the possibility of indefinite extension upon evaluation. The letters exchanged between Ashley and the clinic's director, a Dr. Henry Wallace, were even more disturbing. Ashley had described the triplets as problematic children, showing signs of attachment disorders, irregular behavior, and difficulties in forming healthy bonds. None of a. It was true. Hector, Lucas, and Sophia were completely normal, healthy babies, developing appropriately for their age. But Ashley had constructed a false dossier, documenting non-existent problems, creating a narrative that would justify their institutionalization. And the worst part, there were mentions of generous payments, guarantees of absolute secrecy, and a mutual understanding that this institutionalization would serve interests beyond the children's well-being. It wasn't explicit in the official documents, but a handwritten letter found in the middle of the folder made everything painfully clear. The letter was from Ashley to someone identified only as R, likely a lawyer or consultant. In it, Ashley explained her plan with a coldness that sent shivers down Jessica's spine. She intended to keep the triplets away from Robert long enough to consolidate her position as his wife, to secure control over his business and fortune through specific prenuptial agreements she was negotiating. Once she had that control, the triplets could remain institutionalized indefinitely, or perhaps even be put up for adoption, depending on what was more convenient. Ashley wrote about the children as if they were inconvenient objects, obstacles to be removed. She mentioned that Robert was too weak to make difficult decisions, too caught up in his feelings, and that therefore she would have to act for him. She spoke of the babies as if they were a problem to be solved, not human lives deserving of love and protection. Jessica took photos of every document, every letter, every page of that horrific dossier. Her hands were shaking so much she had to rest her phone on the desk to get clear images. Tears blurred her vision, but she continued, page after page, documenting every piece of evidence. She was so focused that she barely heard the footsteps approaching in the hallway. By the time she realized, it was too late. The library door opened, and Jessica found herself face to face with a man in a gray suit, briefcase in hand, his expression of shock quickly turning to suspicion and anger. Before the man could speak, Jessica heard Ashley's voice from the hallway. That voice she had learned to hate, always so controlled, always so false. "What are you doing here?" The man blocked the doorway. Jessica was cornered, but in that moment of pure panic, something inside her refused to give in. She had grown up on the streets of Bridgeport, had faced hardship, had survived tragedy. She wasn't going to let herself be caught now, not after finally finding the proof she needed. She feigned a move in one direction, causing the man to shift, to block her, then threw herself in the opposite direction, slipping past him with an agility born of desperation. She ran down the hallway, hearing shouts behind her, heavy footsteps in pursuit. She flew down the main staircase at a dangerous speed, skipping steps, holding onto the banister to keep from falling. She crossed the foyer and burst out the front door, which, miraculously, was unlocked. The cold Chicago night greeted her like a liberating embrace. Jessica ran through the streets of Lincoln Park as she had never run in her life, her lungs burning, her legs trembling with adrenaline and fear. She only stopped when she was several blocks away, leaning against a lamppost trying to catch her breath while checking her phone. The photos were there, all intact. She had the proof she needed. Now she just had to figure out what to do with it. She couldn't go directly to the police because she had technically trespassed on private property. She couldn't tell Robert because he had already shown he wasn't willing to believe her. She needed something more, something irrefutable that couldn't be ignored or discredited. The following days were a period of agonizing waiting. Jessica knew that Ashley had probably realized someone had tampered with the document folder, that photos were missing, or there was evidence the hiding spot had been discovered. What Ashley didn't know was that Jessica was patiently waiting for the right moment to act. That moment came 2 weeks later, when Ashley sent out invitations for a grand engagement dinner at the mansion. It was to be a formal event with influential guests, businessmen, politicians, prominent figures in Chicago society. Ashley wanted to make a public statement to solidify her position before the official wedding, and it was precisely this ambition that would become her downfall. Jessica learned about the dinner through Megan, who knew one of the waitresses hired for the event. She found out that Ashley had planned a special presentation, a moving video showing her journey to becoming a mother to the triplets, to building a new family. What Ashley didn't know was that Jessica had her own videos to show. On the night of the dinner, the mansion was lit up like a palace. Twinkling lights decorated the gardens, classical music played discreetly from outdoor speakers, and waiters circulated with trays of champagne and sophisticated hors d'oeuvres. The guests began to arrive around 8 in the evening, all elegantly dressed, chatting animatedly, admiring the elaborate decor. Ashley was stunning in a navy blue evening gown, her hair in an elegant updo, wearing discreet but expensive jewelry. She moved among the guests with that practiced smile, thanking them for coming, accepting congratulations, perfectly playing the role of the devoted future wife. Robert stood beside her, visibly uncomfortable with all the ostentation, but keeping up appearances. Jessica was not among the guests, but she had managed to get in through the service area, wearing a uniform borrowed from one of the waitresses. No one paid attention to the serving staff. Everyone was focused on important conversations, business deals being discussed, social alliances being formed. She moved through the party discreetly, serving drinks, clearing tables, waiting for the moment she knew would come. When the time arrived, Ashley called for everyone's attention. The guests gathered in the main living room, where a large screen had been set up. Ashley began her rehearsed speech about finding love again, about how honored she was to be a mother to the triplets, about the challenges she had faced on the journey to build this new family. It was when she clicked the remote to start the video that the trap closed. The images that appeared on the screen were exactly what Ashley had planned to show. Carefully edited moments showing Jessica in the nursery, handling drawers, holding vials, seemingly acting suspiciously. The videos were cut to look incriminating, removing all context, making it seem as if Jessica were doing something wrong. Ashley explained to the shocked guests about the problematic nanny she had to dismiss, about how she had discovered concerning behavior, about how sometimes the most unlikely people bring danger into your home. It was a masterful performance of manipulation, and the guests absorbed every word, looking at the screen with expressions of shock and disapproval. Jessica, watching from a corner of the room, felt the humiliation burn, but she remained calm. She waited for Ashley to finish her dramatic speech, waited for the murmurs of solidarity and indignant comments to subside. And then, just as Ashley was about to continue with the evening, Jessica made her move. She crossed the service hall to where Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper, was standing. The elderly woman looked at her in surprise and started to say something, but Jessica interrupted her urgently, asking her to follow her to the kitchen. Something in her tone of voice, in the intensity of her gaze, made Mrs. Gable hesitate but agree. In the kitchen, away from the others, Jessica spoke quickly. She asked if Mrs. Gable truly believed she would be capable of harming the children. She asked if, in all the nights she had worked there, Mrs. Gable had ever seen any real sign of neglect or cruelty. And then she asked if Mrs. Gable, who had worked for this family for decades, who had known Catherine, didn't find it strange how Ashley acted with the babies. Mrs. Gable was silent for long seconds, her wrinkled face showing her internal conflict. Finally, she sighed deeply and said there was something Jessica needed to see. She led her to the small room where the mansion's security system was housed, where the recordings from the official cameras were stored. She explained that she had started to suspect Ashley weeks ago, when she saw things that didn't make sense. Objects she knew were intact would appear broken minutes later, stains that appeared out of nowhere. And then, one sleepless night, Mrs. Gable had watched the recordings and seen what was really happening. She placed a flash drive in Jessica's hands. She said everything was on it, all the real recordings from the past few weeks. Ashley sabotaging objects, Ashley tampering with bottles, Ashley planting evidence. Ashley laughing on the phone while explaining her plan to someone. Mrs. Gable had copied everything because she knew that eventually this proof would be needed. She hadn't had the courage to confront Ashley alone, but now, seeing Jessica there, she decided it was time to act. Jessica took the flash drive as if it were gold. She gave Mrs. Gable a quick hug, thanked her with tears in her eyes, and returned to the main room. The guests were still chatting animatedly about the video Ashley had shown. Robert was in a tense conversation with some businessman, looking like he would rather be anywhere else. That's when the crying started. From the second floor, loud and desperate, came the sound of the three babies crying simultaneously. Everyone stopped talking, looking up at the ceiling as if they could see through it. Ashley turned pale, clearly not expecting the children to wake up at that specific moment. She muttered something about the substitute nanny handling it and tried to redirect the guests' attention. But the crying grew louder, becoming progressively more distressed. And then, in an impulsive decision that would change everything, Jessica dropped the tray she was carrying and ran for the stairs. She went up quickly, followed by the surprised gazes of the guests. Someone tried to stop her, but she dodged them, reaching the second floor before they could prevent her. When she entered the nursery, she found the three babies crying desperately in their cribs, alone, the substitute nanny who was supposed to be there mysteriously absent. Without thinking, Jessica went straight to them. She picked up Hector first, then Lucas, then Sophia, making that impossible arrangement that only someone with practice can manage, holding all three against her chest simultaneously. And something magical happened. The babies recognized her instantly. Hector grabbed her uniform with his tiny fingers. Lucas stopped crying that very second, and Sophia rested her head on Jessica's shoulder with a sigh of pure relief. In less than a minute, all three were calm, snuggled, and at peace. It was a scene of pure, undeniable connection, impossible to fake or replicate. The guests who had followed Jessica, curious or concerned, stopped at the nursery door and witnessed it. They saw the baby's instant reaction, saw how they clung to her as if their lives depended on it. And then they looked at Ashley, who had arrived right behind, her face a mask of barely contained fury. The difference between the genuine bond Jessica had with the children and Ashley's falseness became glaringly obvious. Robert finally arrived, making his way through the guests. When he saw the scene, his eyes filled with tears. His children, whom he loved so much but didn't know how to protect, were in the arms of someone who clearly loved them back. And it wasn't the woman he was about to marry. Jessica seized the moment. With a firm voice, despite the tears streaming down her face, she asked everyone to go to the main living room. She said there was something they needed to see, all of them, including Robert. Ashley tried to intervene, tried to say this was absurd, but the guests were too curious, the drama too great to be ignored. In the living room, Jessica connected the flash drive to the television. She excused herself, explaining that she didn't want to interrupt the celebration, but that there were truths that needed to be revealed. And then she started playing the videos. Video after video, Ashley's true face was exposed. First, images of her deliberately breaking the porcelain vase, then placing the shards around the spot where Jessica would be. Then, Ashley pouring coffee on the leather sofa and planting evidence that would incriminate Jessica. Then the most disturbing scene, Ashley tampering with a baby bottle, adding drops from an unlabeled vial, and putting it back in the warmer with a satisfied smile. There was more. Ashley sabotaging the crystal mobile so it would fall, Ashley repositioning objects to create compromising scenes, Ashley on the phone, laughing, explaining to someone how she was creating a history of the nanny's failures, how she was building a case to get rid of her and then get rid of the children for good. The silence in the room was absolute. Guests who moments before had been celebrating now looked in horror at Ashley. Her mask, so carefully maintained for months, had finally fallen completely. There was no denying those images, no way to reinterpret those deliberate acts of cruelty and manipulation. Jessica then showed the photos she had taken in the library, the contracts with the psychiatric clinic, the plans to institutionalize the triplets, the correspondence revealing the true goal of getting rid of the children, not for their well-being, but for Ashley's convenience. Each image was a bombshell, destroying piece by piece the facade Ashley had built. Robert watched it all, paralyzed, his face growing paler, his hands trembling. He saw there, projected on a giant screen for all his guests, business partners, and friends to see, the proof that he had been completely deceived, that he had brought someone into his home who planned to destroy his family, that he had ignored the signs, disbelieved the person who tried to help, and allowed all of this to happen out of cowardice and fear of facing the truth. When the videos finally ended, Ashley tried to speak, tried to explain herself, but the words came out jumbled, disconnected, obviously desperate. No one was listening. The guests began to leave quickly, clearly uncomfortable with the drama they had witnessed, wanting to distance themselves from the situation. In a matter of minutes, the room that had been full of elegant people and lively conversation was empty, leaving only Robert, Ashley, Jessica, and Mrs. Gable, who watched from a corner. Robert finally found his voice. He told Ashley to leave. He didn't shout, didn't make a scene, just said with a terrifying coldness that she had exactly 1 hour to pack her things and leave his house, and that she was never to come near him or his children again. Ashley tried to argue, tried to appeal, but Robert was no longer listening. He called his lawyers immediately, instructing them to take all necessary legal measures to ensure Ashley could never harm them again. When Ashley finally left the mansion, humiliated and defeated, carrying only a small suitcase, the tension that had dominated the house for months finally began to dissipate. Robert stood in the foyer for long minutes, just staring at the closed door, processing everything that had happened, everything he had almost lost. Then he went up to the nursery. Jessica was still there, sitting in the nursing chair, with the 3 babies sleeping against her, finally at peace. Robert stopped at the door, looking at the scene, and the tears he had held back throughout that horrible night finally fell. He asked for forgiveness, not just once, but several times, his voice broken with emotion. He asked for forgiveness for not believing her, for letting fear and denial win over reason, for allowing her to be humiliated and dismissed when she was only trying to protect the children. He asked for forgiveness for being weak, for failing, as a father, for putting his children in danger because he didn't have the courage to face the truth. Jessica, with tears silently streaming down her face, said she understood. She told Robert about Clara, about the little sister she had lost, about the guilt she had carried since childhood for not being able to save her. She explained that she couldn't just abandon the triplets because doing so would be failing again, would be letting the guilt win once more. She said that everything she did, all the risks she took, was because those 3 children deserved to have someone fighting for them, even when it seemed impossible. Robert listened to everything and understood. He understood that Jessica was not just a competent nanny or a dedicated employee. She was someone who genuinely loved his children, with no ulterior motives, no calculations. She was someone who had risked everything for them. And in that moment, with all the painful clarity in the world, he realized that he had found, in the most unlikely person, the mother his children needed. He offered Jessica a permanent position, not as a nanny but as an official part of the family, a room in the main part of the mansion, a fair salary, full benefits, and most importantly, respect and recognition for the essential role she played in the triplets' lives. Jessica accepted, not for the money, but because she had finally found where she belonged. The following months were a time of healing, building, and discovery. Jessica officially moved into the mansion and took over the full-time care of the triplets. Robert, finally free from Ashley's toxic influence, began to be the present father he had always wanted to be but had forgotten how. Together they developed routines, established healthy boundaries, and created an environment where the children could grow up loved and protected. Mrs. Gable, redeemed for having finally done the right thing, became a precious ally, helping Jessica navigate the complexities of managing that huge house. The other staff members, who had been manipulated by Ashley into distrusting Jessica, apologized and became part of a team genuinely united for the children's well-being. Jessica also resumed her studies. Robert insisted on paying for her nursing school, allowing her to finally complete the degree she had put on hold years ago. She managed to balance her classes with caring for the triplets, studying late at night, doing assignments during their naps, determined to achieve that old dream. Over time, something deeper began to blossom between Robert and Jessica. It didn't happen all at once. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was gradual, built on late-night conversations after the children were asleep, on a growing partnership in caring for the babies together, on shared laughter and confessed fears during sleepless nights. It started as mutual respect, evolved into a deep friendship, and slowly transformed into something neither of them expected, but both recognized when it finally happened. One evening, almost a year, after the disastrous engagement dinner, Robert invited Jessica for a walk in the gardens. Spring had arrived, bringing colorful flowers and mild temperatures. They walked in silence for a while, just enjoying the beauty of the night and each other's company. It was Robert who broke the silence. He said he had realized something important in recent weeks, that when he thought about the future, he could no longer imagine a life where Jessica wasn't present, not just as the caregiver for his children, but as his companion, his partner, his family. He admitted that he had truly fallen in love with her, not out of gratitude, not for convenience, but for the strength, courage, and genuine love she showed every day. Jessica was silent for long seconds, processing his words. Then she admitted, with a shyness she rarely showed, that she felt the same. That somewhere between caring for the babies and rebuilding that home, she had fallen in love not just with the triplets, but also with the man who had finally learned to be the father they deserved. There was no marriage proposal that night, no grand romantic gesture. There were just two hearts tired of fighting, alone, recognizing that they had found, in the most unexpected way possible, someone with whom they could build something real and lasting. Time continued to pass, bringing gradual but profound changes. Jessica graduated from nursing school with honors, finally achieving the dream she had pursued since she was a teenager. Together with Robert, she began planning a community project in Bridgeport, a primary care clinic for low-income families, a way to ensure that other children wouldn't go through what Clara had. The triplets grew up healthy, happy, and surrounded by genuine love. Hector turned out to be brave and protective, always defending his siblings. Lucas was the dreamer, creative and sensitive. Sophia had a huge heart, always concerned about others. They had no memory of the biological mother they had lost, but in Jessica, they had something equally valuable, someone who loved them unconditionally and would fight for them to the end. The Lincoln Park mansion, which had once been a cold place dominated by lies and manipulation, transformed into a true home. Children's voices echoed through the hallways. Laughter filled the gardens. Family dinners took place every night in the cozy kitchen, not in the formal dining room, which was reserved only for special occasions. Robert and Jessica eventually married in a simple, intimate ceremony in the mansion's garden, with only close family and true friends present. The triplets, 3 years old at the time, were the ring bearers, carrying the rings on a satin pillow and stealing the show with their funny faces that made everyone laugh. Jessica Davis's story was living proof that family is defined not just by blood, but by love, dedication, and the courage to fight for what is right. She had started as a simple young woman from Bridgeport, carrying trauma and interrupted dreams. She had become the savior of 3 vulnerable children, the guardian of a family that had almost fallen apart. And finally, she had discovered her own worth, her place in the world, and the family she had always deserved. On quiet nights, when the triplets were asleep and the mansion was at peace, Jessica would sometimes stand by the window of the room she now shared with Robert, looking at the stars over Chicago. She would think of Clara, the little sister she could never save, and whisper softly that she had finally done it. She hadn't saved Clara, she never could, but she had saved Hector, Lucas, and Sophia. And in saving them, she had also saved herself, healing old wounds and discovering that true love, when it finally arrives, comes in the most unexpected places and in the most unlikely ways. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Jessica, Robert, and the triplets has touched your heart. If you were moved by the courage of a young woman who risked everything to protect innocent children, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what stood out to you the most. Was it Jessica's determination even in the face of humiliation? Was it the moment the babies instantly recognized her? Or was it the true love that blossomed between two wounded people who found healing in each other? Every day we bring you intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul and show that even in the most difficult situations, love and courage can transform everything. We'll see you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions and make you believe that it's always worth fighting for what is right.